The protests in Iran have ended, but United States military assets remain focused in the Middle East, and Terminal High Altitude Area Defense is now set to be deployed to the United States. The United States appears to anticipate more protests in Iran. Today we'll examine this issue. Let's begin. Before we start, I've published my first book, which is also my first merchandise. It's available at Kyobo Bookstore and nearby stores. Please check it out if you can. I'd appreciate it. The protests in Iran have been devastating, with a high death toll. Time magazine reports that over 30,000 people may have died in the recent protests. This number is over 10 times higher than the 3,117 deaths reported to Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei on January 21 in the West. At least 10,000 deaths are estimated. Moreover, protests have broken out in 4,000 regions across Iran, and the authorities have responded with harsh crackdowns using machine guns and rifles against the protesters, so it doesn't seem like an impossible situation. There is no sign the protests will end. United States Secretary of State Rubio said Iran's economy is near collapse and anti-government protests will restart. Secretary Rubio stated at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing that the Iranian regime is in its most vulnerable state ever, and that there is no way to solve the core grievance of the protesters, which is the economy being on the verge of collapse. He also predicted that new protests would break out. That's understandable, since Iran's exchange rate just passed 1.6 million rials per dollar for the first time. When protests started, it was 1.42 million rials, but it's up 180,000 rials now. The reason these protests broke out was due to economic issues, and those economic problems still haven't been resolved. I mean, if a bowl of plain rice suddenly costs 50,000 won, wouldn't you be angry too? So people in the United States think more protests may soon occur in Iran, right? And at this time, Secretary Rubio put forward the theory of preemptive defense. Currently, a large number of United States military assets have been deployed and repositioned in the Middle East. Looking at it this way, we need to be prepared for the possibility that under certain circumstances, the Iranian regime might decide to attack United States military bases in the region. Secretary Rubio stated that we should consider preemptive defense options. It would be good to take a closer look at this. After the protests broke out, the United States has continuously expressed its intention to strike Iran. Right now, the United States is concentrating more than just 1 or 2 military assets against Iran. The Lincoln, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, is now in the Middle East. President Trump also stated that based on the strong power, passion, and firm determination of Truth Social, a massive fleet is rapidly moving toward Iran. This suggests not only the deployment of the Lincoln, but also the possibility of sending additional fleets. He stressed that the carrier strike group near Iran is stronger than recent operations in Venezuela, signaling tension and hinting at possible urgent military action. At the same time, President Trump pressured Iran, saying that it must quickly come to the negotiating table and reach a fair and equitable agreement to ban nuclear weapons, warning that there is not much time left. As of the 28th, the number of United States Navy warships deployed in the Middle East has increased to 10, and according to United States Navy sources, this appears to include Arleigh Burke-class destroyers as well. The Air Force's reconnaissance, 135 reconnaissance aircraft, has already been deployed to the Middle East. In the past, the reconnaissance 135 was deployed to the Caribbean just before a military operation in Venezuela, but this time it has been deployed to the Middle East. We need to pay special attention to the reconnaissance, 135 reconnaissance aircraft. The reconnaissance 135 is capable of collecting various signal intelligence, and it is one of the Air Force planes that the United States military always deploys to the field before conducting military operations. It can gather a tremendous amount of information. We must closely monitor reconnaissance 135 aircraft deployments. Several Patriot missile defense batteries are already in the Middle East. It appears that these have been deployed to defend Israel, and there are also plans to deploy Terminal High Altitude Area Defense to the Middle East. The Iranian government has stated it will respond swiftly and forcefully to any foreign military action, similar to Abasara. Iran's foreign minister stated through X that Iran's military is fully prepared to respond to acts of aggression not only against the nation's territory, but also its airspace and territorial waters, and that they are ready to take action immediately if necessary. This statement serves as a warning to both internal and external audiences, not just diplomatic rhetoric. This shows the Iranian regime views the situation as more than short-term tension, seeing a real risk of conflict. The government is trying to prevent attacks and keep administration functioning. This measure prioritizes protecting food, fuel, and medicine networks to ensure the state doesn't collapse if the central government is disrupted. Another key aspect is the shift in power structure. Under this emergency order, a significant portion of central authority has been distributed to the 31 provinces nationwide. In case of emergency, the system has been changed so that each provincial governor can cooperate directly with judicial and military security organizations and make independent decisions without approval from the central government. This measure is rarely used and is meant to allow local response if central control fails. Iran's national operations are designed so the country can still function even if the supreme leadership is compromised or communication and command systems break down. Such measures not only help maintain internal unity, but also carry the possibility that military decisions in each region could become decentralized. As a result, the risk of accidental clashes or excessive responses has also increased significantly. In the end, Iran's emergency order is a defensive measure, but at the same time, it is a clear signal of how much the current regime is viewing the situation under intense pressure and anxiety. But for the United States as well, there are clearly practical constraints that make it difficult to easily decide on military action against Iran. If the United States and Iran go to war, the main concern is how key Middle Eastern allies will respond. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have stated they won't allow attacks on Iran through their airspace. This statement is a major diplomatic signal, indicating that if the United States conducts airstrikes or missile attacks, it won't have access to the most efficient air routes. Military operations in the Middle East rely heavily on air force and missile capabilities, but if airspace use is restricted, the operational range and strike time will increase significantly, and as a result, the element of surprise and precision will inevitably decrease. The bigger issue is that major United States military bases are stationed in these two countries. United States military bases in Saudi Arabia and the Arab Alliance are major centers for air operations, supply, and command, not just basic garrisons. If Iranian attacks render those bases unusable, United States operational options will shrink significantly. This means that the United States military would have to deploy its forces indirectly from other regions, and as a result, both operational burdens and political risks would inevitably increase. Turkey is also publicly urging the United States not to launch military attacks on Iran. Turkey, as a NATO member with a strategic location linking the Middle East and Eurasia, makes statements that should not be underestimated. Turkey's land and airspace serve as a secondary route for Middle East operations, but if this becomes politically difficult, the United States will have to make more isolated military decisions. In the end, the United States is in a situation where it must consider both the interests of its allies and the regional situation, regardless of its military capabilities. Under these conditions, it seems that the United States is deeply considering how to handle the diplomatic backlash and strategic costs that would come from choosing to strike Iran directly. Looking at how things may unfold, it doesn't seem likely that the United States will just stand by and watch without taking any action against Iran. The scale and type of military assets now in the Middle East suggests this deployment is more than a deterrent and may involve real action. Deploying carriers, task forces, destroyers, reconnaissance planes, and air defenses goes beyond diplomatic pressure. It's more like preparation that could quickly become an operation. However, rather than the United States directly striking Iran's mainland, the most likely scenario being discussed is one where Israel takes the lead and the United States provides support from behind. There are several reasons for this. First is the political burden. If the United States launches a direct attack, there's a high possibility of anti-American sentiment erupting throughout the Middle East, and it could also cause cracks in relationships with allied countries. On the other hand, if Israel leads the airstrikes, the United States can adjust the level of its involvement under the pretext of providing intelligence, air defense support, maritime control, and rear supply. Another reason is the military reality. Israel has already spent years preparing long-range airstrike scenarios to target Iran's nuclear facilities and military infrastructure, and it's a much more efficient structure for the United States to take on the role of providing the necessary intelligence assets, air defense network, aerial refueling, and missile defense systems. Patriot and terminal high-altitude area defense systems in the Middle East mainly defend against Iranian missile retaliation, while reconnaissance, 135 aircraft, and naval forces monitor Iran and its proxies in real time and help manage escalation. Most importantly, the very fact that so many military assets are being concentrated at the same time is already a sign that the range of options is narrowing. Military power loses credibility if displayed too long, so eventually the United States will be pushed to deliver real results, either by acting or negotiating. Ultimately, as the United States handles Iran's internal instability, the nuclear issue, and regional security, it will likely pressure Iran with limited Israeli-led military actions instead of a direct war, using the outcome to push Iran into negotiations. Taking all these developments into account, it's becoming increasingly convincing that the United States military assets gathered in the Middle East are not just for warning purposes, but are already preparing for an actual operation. I think Iran will likely be attacked, but I don't know when. If you're in Israel, you likely have emergency contacts. Stay in touch and know shelter locations. That's all for this video. Thank you.